Hello, everybody. It's Sunday School Bonanza, a This Week in Mormons production. You know what we're doing here? Gospel Doctrine lessons. We're going to talk to you for, a few minutes right now and make your world a better place. But you know who's going to help me do that? The man from Oklahoma. The man himself, celebrated in the 3 counties of the Oklahoma Panhandle. Bill Doolittle's here.
I'm blushing right now.
You should be.
Yeah. It's a pleasure to represent Oklahoma and to be on here with you, Jeff.
It's great. It's I haven't seen you for a few weeks since the last time we got together, and I hope so much has changed for you.
My hair's gotten longer.
I know. It looks crazy.
It's about that.
You're a wild man. So, folks, if you remember last week on Lesson 7, we talked about the Abrahamic covenant. And we're going to build upon that today, not the covenant itself, but we're going to talk a little bit more about Abraham. And this lesson, though, is called Lesson 8, Living Righteously in a Wicked World. Honestly, I feel like this is one of those kind of, I don't want to call it a filler lesson, but a buffer lesson, one where they said, hey, we need to get another lesson in here. Let's see what we can stretch out of Abraham's dividing of his land between him and Lot and see what we can learn from that. And from, Lot. And plenty of terrible things happen with Lot, the worst of which they don't even mention in the lesson.
Thank goodness, because that's a story that just, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the rating is on your podcast, but it would be
PG-13.
Okay, so then we probably shouldn't talk about it.
This is international production. We'll call it 12A. 12A. This is for you, the Brits. 12A.
This is going to be about 15A, I think, if you include the story about Lot's daughters, which is like totally denounced in the Institute manual. There's like scorched earth. They're like, there's no good reason for doing this, as just to describe.
They General Sherman them, is what you're saying.
They General Sherman them. They say no. There is no good reason why you would have done that, even if you thought your father was the only man left on the earth.
For those who don't know, just look it up.
Yeah, just look it up. But don't look it up in public, or people are going to wonder about you.
It's like if you read Songs of Solomon on the subway. All right, so the point is here, Abraham, of course, has bounced around a little bit during his day. And for some brief history, I'm trying to remember everything about Abraham. So, he'd been living in Egypt because of the famine in the land of Canaan. And now he's going to return to Canaan, and he settles in Hebron, actually, with his nephew Lot. And they make a point about this, about, what are they going to do? They see the land, and the lesson asks us, why could they not live together? Why could they not live together?
Because they were both so rich.
It's because there was just not enough land, I guess, to contain them. So they said, all right, then I'll take this, you take that. We split up, I go left, you go right. The difference was, though, Abraham kept his land and lived his good life and hung out and did his thing. Lot, on the other hand, though, where did Lot choose to live?
He chose to live in the plains right by Sodom.
Yeah, so basically in the environs of Sodom.
Yeah.
Sodom, the famed wicked city, of course, which we'll get into a little bit more. But there's some interesting points here that initially he lived in the plains. And he didn't choose this because he was, smitten by Sodom or anything like that. It was more because apparently the land was very, just very fertile, well-watered, good, and in an agrarian subsistence farming culture, you want to have the good watered land. And so that's understandable. So he took that. But then as time went on, what do we see that Lot starts doing? At first it's outside Sodom, but then he pitches his tent towards Sodom. And then later he lived in Sodom itself.
Yep.
So he slowly shifted in there. So I think it's an obvious question. But what do we do? That's the same thing, basically. We know that Sodom's so wicked. What do we do? Because do we always just rush headlong straight into Sodom when no, we're like, know what I'm going to do? I just want to be able to see it. I'm just going to hang out up here on the hill and do my thing.
Just want to be able to see it. But then you start looking at it, and it looks pretty good. And you're like, maybe it's not so bad down there. Maybe I'll go check it out. Let's go to town this weekend. We'll just see what it's like.
Yeah.
We're not going to talk to a real estate agent, but we're just going to look around. And then it just keeps going.
And so, of course, that's analogous to anything that can go on in our lives, whatever temptations we have, whatever things we do. That's the way Satan wants to get us. He does not expect us to do a complete 180. He expects us to just little by little just kind of turn our tents towards these things, and next thing we know, we want to be right there in the epicenter of all of it. And so that's basically what happened with Lot. And I like there's a good contrast here with the people of King Benjamin, because of course, what did the people of King Benjamin do? It mentions their tents.
They lined their tents up so they could hear King Benjamin's address.
Yeah.
So they were, aiming their tents at the word of the Lord.
Yeah. So let's, so the takeaway here, folks, make your tent face the right. My tent, my apartment faces the Washington Monument. What does it mean? I don't know.
You're a Federalist.
I'm a Federalist.
Or you will slowly become a Federalist.
But I live in the Confederacy, Bill.
You do.
Yeah. That's life.
The good old nation of Virginia. So yeah, and one of my favorite things about the lesson is that it asks, why they split up the way they did, and it says that when they got to this point and they realized that they couldn't both live in the same place, Abraham does this really magnanimous thing. It's like, Lot, you can live wherever you want, and I'll go live somewhere else. And the lesson manual says, how can we follow Abraham's example when we have conflicts with family members or others? And I was yeah, so, honey, I think you should be like Abraham and go sleep on the couch tonight. Like, we just need to separate, or we need to buy a bigger house, or, there's a lot of ways in which you could misapply that principle.
Yeah. No, you buy the nice car. No, it's fine. It's like you're competing on the Amazing Race, and you're like, guys, you can run to the map before us. It's okay.
That's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. I don't need to win.
So, apply that one correctly and not incorrectly. Good luck. So then the next thing that happens is, Lot's over there, and it turns out that in the well-watered area, there's a little more conflict, right? And Lot,
as is often the case with simple geopolitics and economic resources.
Where are the resources? Exactly. Where's the water? We're going to get you. So there's a lot of battles, and probably who knows what your instructor will do. If they know a lot about this stuff, they might tell you. But long story short, Lot is captured by one of these warring kings.
I just want a full reenactment. If one of you is teaching this, stage a battle in your class and have someone play Lot and actually capture him and pull him outside. I just want somebody to do it.
And then get somebody to dress up in the appropriate attire for all the different, of Chedolome, or find out what that guy would have been wearing.
And if you're good at magic, do the whole pillar of salt thing that we'll get to. See if you can pull off some kind of Phantom of the Opera move at the end of it. Yeah,
I think this may be the highest degree of difficulty in a Sunday school lesson ever.
But the payoff will be amazing.
It will be pretty awesome. It will be better than the payoff Lot got, of course, because he was kidnapped during the war, and Abraham went and rescued him. And was invited to take plunder, and he said, no way. I'm not going to take anything from an unrighteous king. And so the lesson asks, and you'll get to discuss hopefully in class, he refused to take anything from the king of Sodom because he didn't want it to taint his unrighteousness. Jeff, what do you think about that?
Bill, are you telling me that I should not take my tax return from Barack Obama?
Depending on your view of Barack Obama's righteousness, perhaps. Okay. Yeah, you should send that back to him. Although now you have to ask, if he takes it from you, does that make him more righteous?
This is a vicious cycle.
We'll just let Jesus judge.
But the real takeaway I get from that is I appreciate Abraham's integrity.
He does.
In this case.
It's a big moment.
And Abraham was not usually one who was wanting. I think he was pretty well established and had his money, so he didn't need it. But at the same time, he did not take another chance to enrich himself, and he said, no, I'm not dealing with this iniquity. I'm not even going to touch it. I'm not going to mess with it. I'm not going to come anywhere near it, be tainted by it.
Yeah, and it's also smart because, if you take somebody else's stuff, you've defeated them in battle, then you take your stuff, you're giving them even more reason to come fight you later, right?
That's true.
Just stay away from it.
Good point.
So, but it is about integrity, and he won't take it. And we also should avoid, taking the fruits of immorality so that we are not tempted into it. Mm-hmm. And he frees Lot, but then he finds, by contrast, Melchizedek, who is the king of Salem. And we were talking about this. I'm not exactly sure who Melchizedek was in relation to Abraham, but Melchizedek was a priest unto the only true God, right? The same God that Abraham worshipped, which is the same one we worship. Mm-hmm. And Abraham knew this about Melchizedek, and so we don't really have the story of how Melchizedek came to be, or if they knew each other, or how Abraham knew to recognize him as a servant of the Lord. But Abraham then went to pay tithes to him, and so by contrast, right, Abraham's refusing to take money from iniquity, but he's willing to sacrifice his possessions and offer them as a sacrifice to the Lord, which he's learned, he's learned throughout his life, making good sacrifices for the Lord. So we just need to compare his, and the lesson invites us to compare his commitment to the Lord versus his commitment to his possessions, and the things that really sank Sodom.
Big time. And I love that, of course, this is the first mention or inference of tithing in all of Scripture. And Melchizedek himself is only mentioned twice in the Old Testament, once here and once in Psalm 110, where it calls him, a holy priest. And I think tithing is a wonderful principle, and we can all learn a lot from it, that Abraham, like you just said, was, rather than take the riches from wicked people, instead he gave up what he had to the proper authority who could, who represented the Lord appropriately in that case, which is terrific. Now, Sodom and Gomorrah, of course, they are warring. They're warring with many of these other city-states, many of which have kings with awesome names, by the way, like Amraphel, Arioch, Chedorlaomer, Tidal. What is his name? Tidal. That one's pretty good. But they're all warring. Everyone's very wicked. So, of course, this is just classic. This is Nephites, Lamanites near the end of the Book of Mormon, just pure wickedness all around. No one has the Lord's favor. But he rescues Lot. And the Lord is going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And there's this great exchange that we have right here. When Abraham seeks compassion, you can tell. He seeks compassion in this sense. He doesn't want to have all the people destroyed. I think he feels like, look, I know they're terrible, but at the same time, you're talking about wiping out cities, plural, worth of people. And so in this exchange, I don't have the exact numbers. Maybe you do, Bill. But I think it starts off with 45, where basically the Lord says, okay, if you can find 45 righteous people, then I won't lay it to waste. And I don't remember if Abraham actually goes back and looks and comes back, or if they just kind of have almost like a bargaining session.
I think it's just a bargaining session. He's like, I've always imagined Abraham's thinking like, all right,
45 is unrealistic.
Like he kind of realizes, yeah, well, okay, maybe if I... because he knows he's got to go into the city and find that many righteous people if he wants to prevent their destruction, and sort of talks himself down, it seems like. Yeah,
big time. I mean, because he goes from 50 righteous within the city, 45, over here, a little bit, find 30 there, and the Lord keeps going down saying, fine, if you can find 20, it's fine. And the last one they says, peradventure 10 shall be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for 10's sake. Now, Bill and I were talking about this before the show, trying to figure out the number of people in Lot's family, for example. And so presumably if Lot's family had 10 people in it, the Lord would stay true to his word and say, fine, they can stay in Sodom and I won't destroy it because there's 10 righteous people. But it was probably a number fewer or less than 10, and therefore they had to be taken away from Sodom, and thus leaving the city regardless with fewer than 10 righteous people. And we know what happened there is, of course, the Lord laid it to waste. But the Lord counseled them before he did this to leave and never look back.
Right. And unfortunately, somebody didn't pay attention. Lot's wife, right? And now there's this great, there is an actual, I don't know what you'd call it. I guess it's the remaining, pillar that is over there that the locals call Lot's wife, but it's just sort of a rock formation that was in the same spot. But of course, she gets really in trouble here for looking back. And of course, your instructor is almost certain to ask, how can we look back, and like what was the sin she committed? Like what was it about looking back? Was it probably was not just I turned my eyes to the wrong place. Maybe that was it.
Yeah.
But it's that sort of longing that we all have, even, and we do this, right? When we've been redeemed, and we've like given up, or have made improvement on something, and then we go back because we look back on it longingly. We look back on it like, oh, I remember some of the things that I thought were good about that, and I still feel that way about them.
Yeah.
And that's how you're not really getting redeemed.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting takeaways you made me think of that is the fact that sometimes even when we think about past lives, like you were alluding to, past transgressions, whatever it may be, do we reflect upon those things with kind of, this sense of wonder, or like, oh, the fun I had at one point in my life, or do we genuinely regret them and have no desire to return to those? Even if we're not actively engaging in those anymore at this time, at this point in our life. And the Institute Manual, which, by the way, if you're studying the Old Testament, the Institute Manuals are extremely useful resources for you. You can just read through them and learn all kinds of stuff, even if you're not reading the Old Testament, passage for passage. And it talks about Lot's wife and the pillar of salt, because one of the questions is, did she actually become, was she literally
turned into a pillar
of salt?
Right.
And also when it says, like you said, look back, did she just glance back and boom? Yeah. And it's easy to think of a vengeful, not very pliable God of the Old Testament who would do that and not even bat an eyelash. But at the same time, so the Institute Manual suggests a lot of different things. It doesn't really come to a complete conclusion. But it does perhaps imply that by looking back, it really meant that she actually maybe like ran back into the city and wanted to get some things, because they were instructed to not take anything, much like Lehi. Don't take your possessions, don't take anything, just get out of the city. That she might have gone back just to pick things up, and she could have been, in this sense, they feel, destroyed in that she went back to the city while it was being destroyed and died in that sense. Of course, the main takeaway is, like it says here at the end of the lesson, whatever happened to Lot's wife, it's clear that she perished.
Yeah.
So no matter what happens, she died because she
didn't go well.
She looked back.
It's not like somebody showed up and gave her a salty treat or something, right? This was the end.
Whether she literally looked back or figuratively looked back, either way, it was her demise was the result.
And the good news is we don't have to assume that she was guilty of anything really awful, and that we usually associate. There's an interesting point in the after notes in the lesson that talks about what the sins of Sodom were, and we usually associate it with sort of serious sexual sin, both because that's the reputation
and given the
name of it.
It's a cognate.
It's a cognate for and it's only, I think it's because we associate it that's what the cognate is.
No, of course. No.
So in the after notes, it points out that it's not just serious sexual sin like that implied in the story of Lot and having to protect the two righteous men and his daughters and all that. In Ezekiel, they send you to Ezekiel 16:49 through 50. It says, "Behold, this was the iniquity of thy sister Sodom: pride, fullness of bread." I don't know what that means. Maybe overeating, but the abundance of idleness was in her and in her daughters. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy, and they were haughty and committed abomination before me. Therefore I took them away as I saw good. Says that's the Lord speaking in Ezekiel, and that makes a lot of sense to me. Like Lot's wife could have been a really pretty good woman, but some of those fundamentals, maybe some interest in possessions that really drew her back in. So we can all be undone by even minor things like that, and certainly that kind of selfishness goes along with serious sexual sin, but we don't have to assume that she was into that as well.
And the hard thing, of course, the main point of this lesson is, how can we live righteously even when we ourselves are surrounded? What if we were living in Sodom, and yet how can we not succumb to any of those pressures and still live a good life? Like Lot was imperfect as well, but I think by and large he lived a pretty faithful life, even when he was surrounded by all this iniquity. And that's the hardest thing to do. Obviously, it is more difficult if we willfully allow ourselves to be surrounded, if we face our tents towards such things, as opposed to more begrudgingly accepting that these are our surroundings, but we're not going to internalize them. And that's a hard thing. I think it's something we all have to learn through this mortal experience and learn to set ourselves apart from it. I think one of the best ways to do that is at least try to make your home apart from the world. We can't avoid what we face day in and day out, but where we can control our own environment, do our best to do that and stand up for ourselves and have a Christ-centered home and a place where the Spirit can be a refuge.
Absolutely.
That's going to be it. Folks, go to all those places where we are, Facebook, Twitter, email, thisweekinmormons.com, Stitcher, YouTube, everything, blah, blah, blah. Join our family. Happy to have you. Bill, thanks for being here.
Jeff, thanks for having me.
This has been Sunday School Bonanza, brought to you by This Week in Mormons, Lesson 8, Living Righteously in a Wicked World. Do not look back at Sodom, everyone. Press forward.